This is Gemara Pesachim Daf Samoch Beis. Today's shir should be a special schos for Shlema for Chaim Yitzchak Moshe ben Esther Rizal. He should have a complete recovery. Still waiting to hear B'siyat Shmaya good news or complete refuah Shlema. Of course, all the other Chaim Chaim Yitzchak ben Malki Demir ben Ikir Ben Ben Vego Ben Chalasi Burden Aslei Lehuva Chaim and Sarah Shlomo Sivim Rizal Zar Bas Kenendi the Basim Chayzei Yisrael Ben Mindel as a parent to Charlei Shlomo Bas Naomi Shafik Chana Faldav Ben Itariv Shmuel Ben Tehila Daniel Ben Chana Rizal Melchachai Bas Minali Baruch Bas Tabia Musa B'Sarich Shar Chali Yisrael. We pick it up at the bottom of Samach Aleph Amid Beis. We're holding 5 lines from the bottom. Maskefla Rav Ashi. Just to catch everyone up where we're holding over here, in order that we could understand this question properly, at the top of the Amid, all the way at the top of the Amid, we began a new sugya. At the top of the Amid began with a question that was Shachtu L'Mailin, that if you shech something for someone who has a bris milah, but when you shechta for him, you did it al menas for that what sheyischabru boy arilim bizrika. You did it so that someone who does not have a bris milah can get a kapara through the zrika, which Rashi explains doesn't really mean get a kapara, because the Karban Pesach doesn't really give you a kapara, but rather what it means is, again, you did the shechita for someone who had a bris, means a kosher, in order to do the zrika for someone who does not have a bris, meaning someone who is not kosher, someone who is possible. And this was a machlekes of Rabbah and Rav Chisda as to be what the din was. Rabbah said it was kosher, Rav Chisda said it was possible. It centered around, after all the dust settled, back and forth, the different drushas, but after all the dust settled, basically, to point out 2 lines over here, that according to Rabbah, what comes out is that there's a kula, as the Gemara here says, ma kula dizrika, de'in machsheves oichlen bizrika. There's a special kula by zrika that the machshava, with regard to the people eating, does not passel at the time of Zrika, and that's the reason why Rabbah said you did the shechita for someone who is kosher. The fact that you had an intent to do the zrika, the sprinkling, for someone who is not kosher, it's not going to passel. That was Rabbah. Rav Chisda came along and he said no. He said zrika is more chomer, and that was the last line, like we saw. Chomra de zrika mekabeya bigol ela bizrika. Rav Chisda said no. Zrika really is chomer. Why is zrika chomer? Because the din of pigel. What's pigel? Pigel is intent to eat something at the wrong time. That din, that intent, that which passels the carbon is only at the time of the zrika. And we pointed out the Rashi that of course if you have intent at all the other dalat avodas, the shechita, the slaughtering, the halacha, the kabbalah, the catching of the blood, the halacha, the walking of the blood, at those points it will also passel the car. Of course, the carbon will be possible, but it won't get the special din of pigel. The special din of pigel is only when you do the zrika, the sprinkling, for eating it at the wrong time. Then as din of pigel, then if someone eats that, they get kari. So that was the machlekes. Again, Rabbah's kasher of Chisda says it's possible. So Maskevler Rav Ashi, this is where we pick it up. Asks Rav Ashi, Mimai dahai v'chol aral. Kula mashman. This is all based off of drashas. So ask Rav Ashi, how do you know that the pasuk v'chol aral comes to teach me kula, referring to everyone? Del mahai v'chol aral mashma koldu. Maybe it means even a little bit. Arla k'siv koldu arla k'siv rachmana. I'm sorry. Koldu arla k'siv rachmana zois. And on that the Torah says zois. Da'diika kula arel loy pasla. Ask Rav Ashi on both Rabbah and Rav Chisda says, and we can really take this with Rashi. Rashi speaks out, as you see over here, 4 lines to the bottom. Rashi speaks out that this question is both in Rabbah and Rav Chisda. That the question is, we both Rabbah and Rav Chisda agreed that the whole Aral taught us all, that they all had to be Aral, and then it was a machlekes whether Zais was limiting or not. The question here is, asks Rav Ashi, how do you know that? Maybe the word v'chol Aral just means a little bit of Aral, which means exact opposite. That what? That until everyone is an aral, meaning until it has 100% kavana for someone who can't eat it, for someone who doesn't have a bris milah, it will not puzzle, meaning maybe even 1% of having good intent is enough, maybe we should learn v'chol arila exact opposite, as the word kol could have referred to a bit, maybe refers to kol aral once it has a little bit then of an aral of someone who has Chol Arol, mashma, that what? A little bit, and Zois is going to teach us the opposite, that has to be 100%. Lo Yishana, and the Gemara says, Lo Yishna b'shchita, Lo Yishna b'zrika. So again, a bit of a difficult question, the wording, but the basic question of Ashi is that maybe V'chol doesn't mean all, rather it means a little bit, and therefore the word Zois comes to teach us the opposite, that it has to mean all, and therefore what's going to come out? It should come out that both according to Rabbah and both according to Chisda, we should be able to learn out from the pasuk that if you have one little bit of kosher, one little bit of a person who could eat the carbon, that should be enough. Elam Rav Ashi comes along Rav Ashi with a totally new way of learning Rabbah and Rav Chisda. Elam Rav Ashi, Rav Chisda, Rabbah, as we move along to today's daf of Samach Beis. Says Rav Ashi, the machlekes Rabbah and Rav Chisda is as follows. B'hai kra kamifki, they're arguing about a pasuk. That what does the pasuk say? V'nirtza loy lechaper alav. The pasuk says it should be an acceptance for them lechaper alav, so that they can gain their kapara, their atonement. Allah has to be and chaper to get a kapara for him, Allah, but not for his friend. What do we learn out from there? Rabba learns that his friend has to be similar to him. And again, we're talking about over here the zrika. We're talking about the zrika. And therefore your friend has to be similar to you. Mahu, just like you, davar kapara, is one that could get a kapara. You are a kosher. Av chaviroi davar kapara, your friend has to also be one that could get a kapara. La'afuki, says Rabbah. Hi Aril, Talavar kaparu. This Aril is one who cannot get a kapara. And that is the reason why it's going to be problematic. Rav Chisda Savar, and I know that Rabbah was the opinion that says kosher. Let's wait 1 second and we'll see how Rashi is going to explain this. Rav Chisda Savar, no. Hi Arel Nami, Kivan Devar Chayuvu. Since the person is an Arel, at the end of the day, true, he does not have a bris milah, but he's a bar chiyuv. He's someone who is ostensibly chayiv to bring a carbon Pesach. Bar kaparu, who's considered someone who's bar kaparul. Why? He says Rav Chisda the very important words. If he wanted, he could fix himself, he could give himself a bris milah, and that is how Rav Ashi explains the machlekes. Let's go up and let's learn a Rashi in order to explain the machlekes. Mir Tashem, once we have this, the rest of the daf should flow very smoothly. Says Rashi in the top Rashi, what is the machlekes Rabbah and Rav Chisda for sheis kabru bo arilim dikamar, that which the question back on Samach Aleph Amid Beis, that we said at the top line, you shechta for someone who has a milah, in order that someone who doesn't have a milah gets a kapara. What do those words mean? Someone who doesn't have a milah should get a kapara. What that means, says Rav Ashi, she'ein minuyan alav ka'amar. Those are the critical words. The case here is not necessarily honing in on the fact that they don't have a milah. That's true. But the point is they were not manui, they were not registered on the carbon. Everyone has to sign up for the carbon. They were not signed up for the carbon, and therefore, misham machshaveh shaloi leminuyav ka'amri, and the issue is you have a machshava for someone who is not registered on the carbon. Avol, now let's just continue Rashi for a moment. I'm sorry. Let's skip the end of the Rashi, and now let's go further. So Rabbi Savar. Now let's explain how does this work into the Gemara. Back in the next Rashi. Rabbi Savar Chavirei Dipsol Misham Shinoi Bailim. The reason it's an issue is because you had intent for the wrong owner. Dom Yodidei Binan Mahu Dvar Kapara. So to your friend has to be a Bar Kapara. Whereas Rav Chisda says no. Rav Chisda says, and therefore. Let's explain. And therefore, according to Rabbah, since it's not a bar minuyam, since, you know what, I'm sorry, we're going to have to read one more Rashi. I know it's getting late. Let's go back to that top Rashi one more time. Avol b'minuyav, back into the Rashi, again, Rashi in the second line. Avol b'minuyav, someone who's registered on the carbon, Allah v'shachlai l'moilin, and you shach someone who has the milah, shein nami minuyav, lizritam l'minuyav, areilim, shebehem levadon, dave kulin zrika. It's all considered part of the zrika, la'areilim, minuyam, the kuli alma, parcel. Everyone's going to agree it's going to be possible. Uba, that case we're not arguing about. Uba, here's their line. Uba arilan she'enan minuyan. Someone who's an aral doesn't have a milah. It's not registered on the carbon. Umisha machshevesh leila minuyav. That is a machlaikas. Again, we're in the first narrow line of Rashi. Rashi is explaining that the machlaikas here is because you have kavana for someone who is not registered on your carbon. And in this pasuk, the vishaloi menuyav zrika me'acha nafka bechol hakarbana is lechaber alav hainu zrika. The zrika has to be alav v'loy al azarik l'shem chaveir. It has to be specifically for the owner and not someone who does a zrika for his friend, and that is what the machlekes Rabba and Rav Chisda is going to be. Rav Chisda is going to say Hoyel, whereas Rabba is going to disagree and not hold of the concept of Hoyel. And therefore, comes out obviously a bit counterintuitive, and this is the last detail before he continued. That according to Rav Chisda, because we can say Hoyel, therefore the person who doesn't have a milah, who could theoretically fix himself, Hoyel, he's able to fix himself. Therefore, it comes out according to Rav Chisda, he is a person who could theoretically be part of the carbon. And therefore, if you have kavana for him, it's going to mess you up. Again, we have to keep in mind, whereas according to Rabba, since this person is no shaykhis, since this person is an aral, and he's not registered, the kavana, that type of kavana, is not going to mess you up. So again, according to Rav Chisda, the kavana is going to mess you up. Why? Because according to Rav Chisda, this person has potential ability to be part of the carbon, so kavana for him in the state where he's not fit for the carbon makes it possible. According to Rabba, this person has no intent, and therefore the carbon will be kosher. Says the Gemara, let's get into it. To me, you say Rav Chisda Hayil? What? Rav Chisda holds of Hayil? This should be reminiscent of something we learned a few days ago. Vayitmar, but we learned not a few days, about a few weeks ago, if you cook and bake from Yantav Zoh, week there, you get Malchus, Rabba says you don't get Malchus, why not? We say oil, that what? If guests would have come, Chazile would be fit for the guest. Hashanami Chazile, it's also fit for them, but you don't get Malchus. Rav Chisda, no, you get Malchus. Rav Chisda holds, we don't know the oil. Stira, you just told me that Rav Chisda holds of oil. We see over here in the Bryce, Rav Chisda does not hold of oil. Says the Gemara, Rabba, Rabbi himself is not a stira. Why not? In our case, in our case, the reason why there's an issue because Rabbi holds there's no hayil in our case because the person lamaisa doesn't have a bris milah. Good, he could get a bris milah, but the practicality is he's not action. Says Rabbi, we don't say hayil. Somebody baking on Yantav, you're not lacking in action. You just have to invite a guest, and the food is ready all baked. It's not we say hayil. Rav Chisda himself, kasha is a stira. According to Rav Chisda, by us we say hayil. When you're lacking in action, you have to give yourself the milah. Certainly by Yantif, you should say hayil. Answers the Gemara, Amrit kiles Rav Chisda hayil lekula. Rav Chisda only doesn't hold the hayil over there because it's a kula. Lachamra isle. In our case, it's a chamra. In our case, the fact that he says hayil, you could make yourself part of the carbon. Therefore, it's going to passel the carbon. That's a chumrah. Rav Chisda only holds of hayil le chumrah. That is the end of this bit of a complicated and lengthy discussion that continued from yesterday's daf. Amar le mar zucha breder amari l'ravina. Now we're going to go back into yesterday, all the different dinim that came out within the machlekes Rav and Rav Chisda. We're going to dissect them one by one. So mar zucha says breder amari to Ravina. Katani we learned hayil va'arila paiselis. Arol is a pasol. Someone who doesn't have a bris milah. V'toma paisel. Someone who is not tar. Ma toma, just like someone who is not tar. Loy asma mixas toma. As we spoke out yesterday, that the Brisa taught us that just like if you have part of a carbon for someone tar, part of someone tamei, it is not possible avarela. So to someone who doesn't have a milah, like a mixarel kol milah. Says the Gemara, Hai toma hechidami. What is this case where part of the people and part of the carbon is a toma? Hechidami ilema b'tomas gavri. Are you talking about where part of the people are tamei? Meaning you're shechting the carbon for 5 people tamei, 5 people tar. Umay loy asma mixas toma. What does it mean that we don't make that people who are partially tamei, we don't make the whole carbon considered like it's tamei? That what? If there are 4 or 5 people tamei who are tamei, and 4 or 5 people ta'irim which are tar, we're not going to make them lo paslu tamei on the tire, and the tameim will not mess up the tire. And if that's the way you're learning, kabi arila nami, someone who doesn't have a mila also, halo pasli the tanan, that which we said it doesn't paslu the tanan, we learned in the Mishnah. If you shecht for both one who has a mila, one who doesn't have a mila, different types of people, kosher, it's kosher. Maishna toma de pshitale, or maishna arila de misafkale. I don't understand why is one pashin and one not pashin. Just like we know for davar pashin that the tameim will not mess up the tahirim, and the carbon will still be good if you shechta for partial people who are tar, partial people who are tamei. So too if you shech for partial people with a milah, partial people without a milah, it should also be kosher, like we see preferish in the brisa. So why yesterday in the brisa were we masopik? We weren't sure. In the case for partial milah, partial not milah, we weren't sure the din. So says Gemara, you know why? It's a different case. Elo b'tomas basar. We're talking about a case where part of the carbon is tamei. Umay lo yas what makes us toma k'chol tama. And what does it mean? We don't make partial tama like all tama. If one aver of the carbon became tamei, the part that became tamei, we're going to burn and chuck that part, but the rest of the carbon will be tar. That's what it means. It means a different thing. It means within the animal, part is tar, part is tamei. Says Gemara, 1 second. That which you tell me now that we're talking about the case that the animal, the carbon became tamei, Ema Seifa, 1 second. Go back into the Brisa on Tamach Aleph on the base. What did the Seifa say? We judge something which does not apply to all carbonates, something which does not apply to all carbonates, and don't prove to me that don't prove to me from the Zman, the soul of having something intent for the wrong time, which does apply to all the carbonates. 1 second. Umay Toma. What's this din of Toma you just said? If you're telling me now, what did the word Toma mean? And then Tomas Basar referring to the carbon, that the carbon is partially tar, partially tame, meaning one limb is tame. What do you mean it's not noig by all carbonates? Of course it is. Any carbon in the world, if part of it becomes tame, you got to burn that part. Of course that's noig by all carbonates. Ella, what must the Bryce have been talking about? Pshita the Tomas Gavri. It must be talking about people. That's a special din by the carbon Pesach. That's a special din that a carbon Pesach, if you have partial people who are tame, partial people are tar, that's a din in Pesach. And what does it mean? It doesn't relevant to all other carbonates. All other carbonates are v'tamei mishlichei carbonaseim. That's the difference, which we didn't point out yesterday, but we see the din now. Someone who is an aro doesn't have a milah. Someone who is tame, they themselves, of course, can't bring the carbon. But what could they do by a regular chatas, regular shlamim, etc.? They send their carbon with a shliach. Yet by Pesach, there's a special din. They're not allowed to send their Pesach with a shliach, and that is the chumrah. So the Gemara just proved that the second half of the Bryce has to be talking about what? When the person is tamei. Whereas the first part of the Bryce was talking about what? Where the animal was tamei. Asked the Gemara, Reisha b'tomas basar v'seiva b'tomas kavri? Amar Lei responded, yes, that is the Bryce. Amar Lei in Shem Toma Kaparich. That is what the Bryce is talking about. That the first part is talking about where the animal is tamei. The second part is talking about where people are tamei, and that is not a question. Dibai Sema, second answer, Seifa Nami b'tomas basar. Really, I can suggest that the Seifa is also talking about Tomas Basar. What was the problem? If the Seifa was talking about Tomas Basar, then what did it mean that all other carbonos, the ilu b'chol hazvachim, all other carbonos, bein shenitma chelev, Basar Kaim, by all other carbonos, whether the first wide line, whether the chilev, the forbidden fats became tummy, and the flesh of the animal is still intact. What's the halacha? Zayrik is adam. You still have to do the zrika. Does not invalidate the entire carbon from the fact that the basar or the chila part of it became tamei. When it comes to the carbon Pesach, netma chilev or basar kayim. What's the halacha? If the chilev is tamei, then zarik is adam. But nitmar basar v'chilev kayim is zarik is adam, and therefore that is the reason why the carbon Pesach is different. It's true that if part of a carbon, if one limb becomes tamei, by all carbonates, then the whole animal becomes tamei. But there is a special din by carbon Pesach. That is the special din with regard to when part of the animal, if the flesh becomes tamei, you cannot even do the zrika of the dam of that animal, whereas by all the carbonates, even if the flesh became tamei, you're still allowed to do the zrika. Says the Gemara, B'mayu kimta. B'mayu kimta, still we're within this brisa, you were still explaining the brisa from yesterday's Samach Aleph and these. B'mayu kimta b'tumas basar. That would you explain that the brisa is talking about tumas basar, that the flesh became tamei. Ema seifa. Let's go into the seifa again. What did the Sefer say? This was, if you go back to the Brisa, there were two different parts of the Brisa. First, the Brisa brought the part that we just said a moment ago, whether it's equated to all their carbonates. Now the Brisa brought a second part, whether it's hoter mechlali, meaning whether there's ever a potential that this din will apply. Certain psulim are pasul in every single case in the world. Certain psulim have times when they're going to be kosher. So says the Gemara, what does it mean that it says hoter mechlali, but don't bring me a raya from tama, shari hoter mechlali. Tama is always tamei. B'mai, what's the case over here? And then we'll explain and we'll figure out exactly what this means. Moving along to Samach Beis and Beis. If you're going to tell me, but Tomas Basar, where like you just suggested, that while we're talking about the flesh became tamei, heicha hotra. when in the world is a carbon with the flesh tamei going to be mutter? That's not true. If the carbon's flesh is tamei, always every carbon in the world, that carbon is tamei. So what do you mean? It's not hodra mechlala, that there are times it's kosher. No, it's not. Elu pshita. What must you explain to me that part of the Bryce is referring to? But Thomas Gavri. It means that the person is tamei. Ve'echi hodra. What does it mean that it is hodra mechlala ditzibur? That means that there are times that when a kayin or the bailim or someone is tamei, there are times you still can bring a carbon. What are those times? When the Gant Klal Yisrael, when the Roiv, when the entire Klal Yisrael is tamei, then one that is tamei still had to bring a carbon. Then it makes a lot of sense. So says the Gemara, it must be talking about that what? That the Kayin himself is a Thomas Gavri, and not that the carbon is tamei. Reisha, 3 lines down. Same kasha. Reisha b'temas basar v'temas gumas gavri. Answers the Gemara the same teretz. Yes, shem tema kaparach. Teretz number 1. Teretz number 2. V'yibayzema kulam temas basar. Really, no, it's all talking about that the animal became tamei. V'echadra. So what is the case where there's an animal which is tamei, and you can bring that as a carbon b'toma Pesach. When the animal became tamei with regard to the Pesach, that's not even there to the Mishnah. Pesach haba b'toma nechal b'toma. If you bring a carbon Pesach while it is tamei, the halacha is you have to eat it when it is tamei. That is a special and unique din with the carbon Pesach. Now the carbon Pesach, if it's brought b'tama, you still are allowed to eat it. You just have to eat it b'tama. So what did it mean that there is a potential, a carbon that the Pesach is different, that it can be brought b'tama? It meant that if you brought it b'tama, there will be a potential way to eat it when the bailim, the kayin, or the bailim I should say, are tamei. Masiv Ravuna Berei Rav Yeshua. And that really concludes the end of yesterday. I know it's quite lengthy. That's the end of the Bryce of Samach Aleph and Beis. Again, just a quick recap as we started off today, trying to figure out within the Machlekes Rav and Rav Chisda, what exactly were they disagreeing about? Rav Ashi gave a totally new understanding that they were disagreeing about She'ein b'menuyav, one who was not registered on the carbon. And now we just had 2 lengthy questions that went within to the Brisa itself and tried to prove from the Brisa itself, was it Thomas Basar or Thomas Gavri? Which one is it? Is the animal tamei or was it the Bailim tamei? And we plugged it into the different dinim of Pesach and Shar Karbanos. Now says Gemara, Masav Ravuna Berei Rav Yeshua, about 8 lines down. Samach Beis Amid Beis Ha Pesach Sha'avru Shenasai. The carbon Pesach that a year passed by. Bishachtu Bizmani, and you shechted it on Pesach Lishmai for the sake of the carbon. Or V'chena Shechad Acherim L'Shem Pesach Bizmani. What's the halacha? Let's Bryce Yeshua Machshir. Halacha number 1 we have to know. Hopefully by the end we'll know all of halachas of carbon Pesach. Carbon Pesach is only from an animal that is 1 year old. Here what happened is you took an animal 1 year. Let's say now, no, not now. Let's say right before Pesach, you took an animal and he said this animal is going to be my carbon Pesach. He didn't bring it that year. The next year, what happens? That animal is more than a year old. Is that animal any longer allowed to be brought as a carbon Pesach? Absolutely not. But you went and you brought it anyways, l'shem Pesach, at the right zaman. And on the 14th, what is the halacha now? So Rav says it's possible. Usually says it is kosher. Now the Rav Yeshua says it's kosher. Now the Gemara explains, time of Bismani. Let's learn into this price. So what's the reason that there's a tzad? According to Rav Yeshua, it's kosher. It's because it's Bismani. It's on the 14th. Hashaloi Bismani. Sorry, according to Rav Elazar, why is it possible? Because it's Bismani. Hashaloi Bismani. If it's not during the Zman, if it's during the year, kosher. It's going to be kosher, will be Ashlamim. V'ama, yes, the Gemara, what's the reason? Name a Hayalu Bismani, Basel. Why don't we say that since Bismanoi, it's going to be Basel, Shalai Bismanoi, Nami Basel. This goes back to Shalai Bismanoi. Rashi explains that what's the question of the Gemara? Va'amai Rav Chisda. Again, what was the question? Rav Huna Berei Yeshua is asking that according to Rav Chisda, the Amar L'chomra Amrinan Hoyel, Rav Chisda holds we yes say Hoyel, Nema Hachi Hoyel. So why in this case don't we as well say Hoyel? Ve'ilu Zmanoi Have, and therefore it should be like the Zman, V'shach Lishmai Mivsal, Hachinah. Name a list should also be possible. So again, back to the Gemara. The Gemara is asking on Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda, you start off today in the top of Amud Aleph. Tommy, that you hold to the concept of V'hoyel, ask the Gemara of Amhai. If you hold of Hoyel, so in this case as well, name Hoyel Bismanai Basel, Shalom Bismano, we should also say it should also be Basel. Amarav Papa, Shiny Asam Damar Kro, it's different. The Pasuk says, Va'amartem Zevach Pesach, that should bring your carbon who? Va'avyasa, it should be in its state. Lo Yuhu, Lo Shem Acherim, and not it for the sake of others, Lo Acherim Lishmai, and not others for its sake. Bismanai, now we explain. When it's the time for the carbon and Erev Pesach, Shu Shu Pasal, which is Pashal, L'Sham Acherim. When Bismana you cannot do it for someone else, Acherim Psulim Lishmai, then it will also be possible if you did a Lishma. Shalai Bismana Shu Kasher, L'Sham Acherim, Acherim Ksherim Lishma. And therefore says the Gemara, that's the reason why it's not a stira on Rav Chisda, even though Rav Chisda holds of Hayel. The reason why here it's going to be problematic is because it was done for the wrong Bailam. Now we have a bit of a story connected to this concept. Rav Simlai, also like Amid Rav Yechon, Rav Simlai came in front of Rav Yechon, Amar Le Niti Mar Sefer Yochson, teach me Sefer Yochson. Amar Le Rav Yechon responded, Mechana, where are you from? Amar Le Rav Simlai says, Milod. Vechon Maisvacham, where do you live? He asked. Menardai, Rav Simlai lives in Ardai. Amar Le Rav Yechon says, Eini Dainu Le Ludivle in Ardai. I can't teach the Sefer Yochson to those who live in Lod, and nor those who live in Ardai. V'kolsh came to Ad, Milod Mazim in Ardai. Certainly you that live in Lod, and you sleep and you dwell in Ardai, no way, you learned in Lod, therefore no way I can teach you to Sefer Yochson. Kafye v'artzi, so Rav Samlai pushed him and he agreed, and Amar Alei, and Rav Samlai said to him, Nisni begimel yarchi, he says Rav Samlai, teach me the Sefer Yochson. After he pestered Rav Yechon finally agrees, he says, teach it to me in 3 months. Rav Yechon shakal kalo pastik bay, he took up a piece of earth and he threw it at Rav Samlai. Amar Alei, and Rav Yechon says, Uma Burya, the bit of Rameir, the daughter of Rameir, the wife of Rameir, Brati Rav Chia ben Tradian, the daughter of Rav Chanina ben Tradian, Titania, we learned in the Brisa, she was quite a holy woman. And yeah, we learned, Tlas Meir Shait Brisa, she used to learn 300 teachings, every single day. Begimel Meir Rabbasi, for 300 Rabbeim. Va'afilu Achin, even though she learned 300 teachings of 300 different Rabbeim every single day, still, Lo Yatzi De Chavasa B'Tlashin, and it still took her 3 years. It took her 3 years to learn Sefer Yochson. Va'at, and you Rav Simlai, Amrit Tlasa Yarchi, and you want me to teach it to you in 3 months? Rav Yechon was quite upset. Kishakav Azal, so Rav Simlai sees he's not learning Sefer Yochson over here, so he gets up to leave. Amar Lei, he says, Rabbi, Rav Yechon, let me ask you one question. Ma bin l'shmai, what's the difference? That when we have lishmai and shaloi lishma, what's the difference between that and what? Lo eichlav v'shloi lo eichlav. What's the difference between the two cases? Amar Leis, Rav Yechon responds, 4 differences, and for this we're going to conclude for the day. Ha yil b'tzor b'meir rabbanan. Rav Yechon says, you're Talmud Chacham, you want to learn Torah? Tavim l'cha. I'll explain it to you. Difference number 1: lishmai v'shaloi lishmai psula begufai. It's a psul intrinsic into the carbon, so it's possible. Lo eichlav v'shloi lo eichlav. When you're doing it for 2 different groups of people, one group of people who could eat, one group of people who cannot eat, like someone who's a chayler or an elderly person, aim psula begufa is not psula intrinsically. That's why that's kosher. Number 1. Number 2, lishmai v'shalai yev shalavar yisurai. There's no way to find where the Isser is. When you have 2 intents on one carbon, there's no way to figure out which part is Asr, which part is not. Yet, you could be Mavar, you could figure it out. You could say, okay, this part is for this, and this part is for this. Similarly, number 3, that Kavana is going to pass by all 4 of the intrinsic Avodas, the Shchita, Kabbalah, Ilach, and Zrika. It does not apply by all the Avodas, only applies by the Shchita. And the 4th and final difference is Yeshlei B'tzibur Kibi Yachid applies even by a carbon tzibur. And that concludes the 4 differences between Lishmai V'Shlei Lishmai and Leichlav V'Shlei Leichlav. Rav Ashi Amar, and Rav Ashi argues on one of them, and he says Psuloi Begufa V'Yev Shlevayer. Those first 2 things, Yisuri Chad the Milsi, he held that they're one thing. They're totally zebazeh. Why? Dematam Amr Psul Begufa. What is the reason they said that it is intrinsically possible? Misham V'Yev Shlevayer Yisuri. Because you can't find the Isra, that's why it is intrinsically possible. And Amar Ravi Bar Ravuda Amar Rav, Miyom Shenigza Sefer Yochson, the day that the Sefer Yochson was buried, Tashash Koichach Sham, the Chum got very weak, Vekami Einayim, and their eyes dimmed. Amar Marzutra, Ben Eitzel, between the 2 words, Eitzel within the Sefer Yochson, Tina Dal and Mea Gamli Drasha requires 400 camel loads of Drasha. That's how deep and intense the Sefer Yochson was. That's how much you had a darshan from there. I'll pick up from the Tanya tomorrow.